Hello! Today we're going to talk about milestone based game development, which for you can make the difference between being someone who works on video games for fun in your spare time to being an indie developer that is creating video games that people and publishers are interested in learning about and maybe want to give you money for. So, for context, I started the current project that I'm working on, Project Gilgamesh, back in 2017, right after I graduated from grad school and around the time I started working in the games industry. It's been a slow burn over the years, and I think a huge portion of that time was spent even discovering what kind of game it was. There's a great article by Derek Yu, the guy who made Spelunky. It's titled Finishing a Game, and I'll share the link to that in the description. But it has this like great Venn diagram of three overlapping circles, and the circles are the games I want to make, the games I want to have made, and the games that I am good at making. And at the intersection of these three circles is where you want to be. And so I think I spent most of the time from 2017 up until the end of 2020, start of 2021, even discovering the answers to each of those questions. And of course, I roughly had ideas going into it, but until the rubber hits the road and you actually start trying to make a game and do the thing, it's hard to say for sure and definitively come up with answers for them one way or the other. And for me, the answers to those questions are as follows. The games I want to make are games with weird and interesting narratives accompanied by fluid movement systems and trippy visuals. The games I want to have made, like looking back at the end of my career, right, are games that push the medium forwards a little bit by doing something that no one else may have thought of before in terms of genre mashups and mechanics, as well as games that are somewhat timeless in their appeal and subject matter. And the games that I'm good at making are games that involve third person character controllers with complex movement, and games that use shaders and visual effects in non traditional ways in order to achieve the previously mentioned trippy visuals. It's funny because it seems fairly straightforward when I lay it out that way, but I spent years and years and went down a huge number of dead ends in order to arrive at the skills that I have and the knowledge to answer those questions. So, all that aside, how does any of that tie into milestone based game development? Ideally, you're smarter than I am, and you spend less time and energy mucking about in order to figure out where those circles intersect for you. And once you do, you'll actually be able to set out and make a fucking video game. And from the outside looking in, it can often seem like the process of game development is just this narrow, straight road that you spend X amount of years making a game, and then you deliver it into the hands of your players fully formed, and then you move on to the next project, right? And at least for me, this was the impression I had about the game development process going into it. But in reality, I think the road is much less straight and narrow and more like a windy mountain road, and you need to do a bunch of pit stops along the way in order to touch base with people who actually can play your game and give you feedback on how it feels all along the way. And this is where milestones come in. At the start of 2023 is when I decided to adopt a milestone based game development process, originally aiming to deliver 4 demos a year. I since have revised that now to 3 demos a year just because I realized working on it part time, there's just the constraints of like how much time I can actually have in order to deliver on how many milestones can fit into a year. But regardless, each demo being a milestone where I would have set goals and set features that I aim to deliver. This helped immensely because the key thing it forced me to do was actually plan out some kind of roadmap. And this is really important for me in particular because I hate planning with a passion. I am very much a go with the flow type of guy, and that's great in my personal life. But it is not at all conducive to delivering a project on any kind of deadline or making any sort of realistic progress when your goals are so loosely defined. And the funny thing is, once I actually started to do the planning thing and define what the goals of each demo and milestone would be, it became so much easier and so much less of a hassle to make the game than the way I approached things before, where the way I approached things before was just this like, okay, what am I gonna do today? Figure it out, pick the thing that seemed most interesting to work on and just do it, right? And like I think it's an interesting combination where early on I needed to do that in order to even figure out what it is that I was good at, like answer those 3 questions, figure out where those 3 circles intersect. So I don't even know that that was necessarily wasted time, But once you have approximate answers for each of those questions, and then you actually want to create a game and get it done within a certain deadline and like put it up on Steam or something, I think you need to approach the process in a more organized, systematic manner. And the neat thing is that the way you define your roadmap doesn't need to be incredibly precise or set in stone either. The important thing to do, I found, was to just set some goals and try to work towards them concretely. Some things are going to get done, other things won't, and those can get pushed on to the next deadline or the next milestone. But the planning is important because it forces you as a developer to decide what is actually important to spend time on and work towards, as opposed to what I was doing before, which was just figuring it out as you go along. And the other important thing about having a milestone-based development process is that each milestone is functionally a prototype of what the final version of your game will look like. And much like the windy mountain road, that too is going to change over the years as you run into different problems in your design space and discover what works and what doesn't. This is probably worth a whole video in and of itself, but I will link a fascinating video that I watched about this thing, not just related to game development, but just in the general creative process of artists as a whole. I'll link to it, and it was incredibly enlightening to me in helping understand a thing that I don't know that I necessarily realized, but oh yeah, like adopting this milestone-based process actually was helping me in much the same way that the video sort of laid out. Anyway, the high-level takeaway from that video is that each milestone allows you to discover problems ahead of time and implement solutions for them before you invest a bunch of time creating content and scaling the game up into its final form. And this is good because once you put a bunch of time into creating a bunch of levels, creating a bunch of art, and implementing a bunch of mechanics, and then you suddenly discover a fundamental problem much later on, it becomes much more difficult and way more expensive in both terms of time and money to address that problem and work around it. Viewed that way, I think it's actually really important to spend a decent amount of time and several milestones, at least 3 to 4 of them, building out prototypes for what your game and its mechanics will look like before you commit to a single design direction and vision for your game. And ensure that you've explored the problems inherent to each direction and know with some amount of confidence that you've addressed the biggest problems and built a solid foundation for the rest of your game to be created on. And then finally, milestones and the demos that you can deliver at each process are incredibly useful to garner feedback from actual human beings other than yourself. When you get people to play your demos and give you feedback, it helps validate your design decisions and discover bugs and problems, which is pretty obvious. Like, you want people other than yourself to play your demos because, trust me, you will never, like, players can break your games in ways that you didn't even previously think possible, and that's just what it means to be a game developer. You can't just test your games by yourself and expect to discover any meaningful information as opposed to just putting it in front of a random person and saying nothing and just watch them play the game. It'll be torturous and painful, but the information you get from that is worth its weight in solid gold. And yeah, it's quite important because it also, apart from like the bug fixing and like kind of the feedback aspect of it, it also gives these people, right, a sense of what you're aiming towards and then decide for themselves if they want to invest emotionally in your project and become a supporter and a fan and stick around for the long haul until you release. And yeah, like when you, apart from, like kind of the player aspect of it, when you get publishers to play your demos, it gives them a chance to decide if they want to invest financially in your project. I'm almost convinced that it'd be impossible to convince a publisher to support you financially nowadays without a demo in hand, unless you're already an established game developer with a pedigree of previously published indie and AAA games. A publisher is going to want to see your demo and some kind of proof of concept before they hand you hundreds of thousands of dollars. Unless you are like a super famous game developer already, in which case, why are you watching this video? Go make a video game. Don't listen to me. But yeah, that's it. That's this video. Hope it was helpful, and thank you for watching.